listening to The Tenderness Revolution, a podcast about the stories of kindness, compassion, and empathy that play out in our lives, because these deeply moving experiences describe what it means to be human and invite us into a new way of thinking about the world and each other. I'm your host, writer and journalist Yvonne Gavin. And every episode, I'll be asking a new interviewee about a pivotal moment of tenderness that helped shape the course of their life. I'm here today with Malebogo Molefhe, a former national basketball player from Botswana who, at the age of 29, was brutally attacked and shot 8 times by her former partner, who subsequently committed suicide. The attack left her with a spinal cord injury, confining her to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Unsurprisingly, this experience profoundly changed Malebogo's experience of the world. But rather than isolating herself from society and falling victim to negative thoughts, she chose to connect with other women and girls with disabilities who are often at even greater risk of domestic violence, and now uses her profoundly traumatic experience to motivate, empower, educate, and inspire others. And in 2017, she was selected, along with 11 other women from different nationalities, to receive the prestigious International Women of Courage Award. Malebogo continues to speak globally on the issue of domestic abuse, gender-based violence, and the intersection of disability, gender, and violence. She is currently single and lives in Botswana. It's so good to have you on the podcast with us. And you have such an amazing story. I can't wait to hear about your journey. But first, I really want you to share your moment of tenderness with us. Because the idea behind the Tenderness Revolution podcast is that essentially our lives are made up of all these little stories stitched together. And when we shine a light on the scenes where we felt a profound sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, moments when we felt seen or understood, or that we had a deeper connection to the world around us, it's as though we're awakened to like a greater sense of meaning and purpose. I really like to hear your moment.
Yes. Woken to, I love the last words that you used, like woken to the real world of purpose. From my mist, in my perspective, from my mist of pain, heartache, heart wrench, frustration and sadness, and acknowledgement of hard facts, came at the moment of tenderness. This is a moment when I looked at the sad but brave face of my mom, that I realized that I had to hold my end of the bargain. This is a woman who my life depended on, and at that moment when I was lying in my sickbed at hospital, I realized that she was the only thing that made my heart tick. She held me together. You know, it felt like when she was not there that I was not together. So I realized that having her around me gave me the courage, gave me the strength. And even though she herself was battling, she had this significant amount of grace that she could draw from. She had this strength, this amazing strength that held everything together. And I knew that she was battling herself. And as the only child, as the provider, I knew that I needed to be strong that moment for her. I needed to fight despite the battles that I was going through internally, despite the pain and the hurt. And I needed there was a certain kind of purpose that was initiated inside of me, that I needed to do something to hold myself together for her.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Malebogo, for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. I've got shivers down my spine because I really feel it. I really feel that it's as though you're describing like a deep connection that you have with your mother, but also the way that inspired a deep sort of purpose in you as well. And it was a pivotal moment. It sounds as though it was a turning point for you, or a moment where you decided that you were going to have to really, you had to get better. You absolutely had to.
This is a moment when I felt, for sometimes when I woke up from my reverie after the incident that had happened to me, I felt like I questioned myself. Obviously, I had moments when I felt really at my lowest, and I felt like there was no purpose at all. I questioned why God allowed me to survive. But, being in a different country, being in a different space, that also came up with a lot of burden. Because first of all, I have to reflect at the fact that my mom was not working, and I was the sole provider for her. I'm the only child, and her being in a foreign land where she didn't have accommodation, and yet I was hospitalized, meant that there was now more. There was now more. There was an added challenge of having to sustain herself and having to pay for hotels and so forth. But then I was in hospital, and she also needed to be there so that she can take care of me. And noting that all of these things brought about a certain amount of challenge and burden to both of us. And not at any point has she succumbed to the pressures. She was always very withstanding. She was always giving me courage. And she was my pivotal support. She offered so much that no one else could offer me. Then I realized that my life depended on her love. My life depended on her strength. And for that, I needed to fight for her, because I needed to stay alive so that I can make her happy. My life depended on her. And I've never felt that amount of love for anyone. And maybe it started to dawn on me that I needed to do better, that I didn't have to give up, so that I could be there for her, so that when she instilled that strength inside of me and that hope, that I also needed to give it back to her and fight for my life.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So, Malebogo, just to go back, what you're describing here is this 2009?
This is in 2009 when I had my injury.
So you're in hospital in South Africa, which is the foreign land that you're describing, because you're from Botswana.
Yes.
And it's in Botswana where you had where this incident took place.
Yes.
Would you be able to describe the incident to us, for our listeners? What happened on that night?
Yes, on that fateful night, unfortunately, I was attacked by my ex-boyfriend. We had had problems in the past which had led to this path. We had arguments, and unfortunately the relationship had broken irretrievably, so we had to part ways. Unfortunately, he did not take the news well, and after a certain amount of time, like a few months, he started to communicate back, and he wanted us to get back together. But I could not offer him the same respect. As you know, in relationships you keep going back and forth, hoping it will get better with time. But then, it had really broken, and there was nothing else to repair it. So unfortunately, he wanted the relationship to go further. So when he communicated back and wanted us to go back together, I did not afford him that same respect. So he came unannounced on that fateful night. He had called earlier and asked us to meet, but I didn't want to meet with him because I knew he had he had a very short fuse, and I was afraid that if I allowed him to come and see me, he would probably beat me up or do things to me that he had done in the past. So I was really fearful of him. So on that fateful night, he came unannounced. It was around 2 a.m. in the night. I wasn't expecting him, and he shot at the door a couple of times until it broke and he was able to forcefully gain entry. This is when everything happened. It happened so fast. He instructed me to get dressed because obviously I was sleeping and it was in the wee hours of the morning, and I was hoping to go to work because it was on a Sunday, and I was going. It was early morning Monday, and I was hoping to go to work that morning. So he quickly instructed me to get dressed. I quickly got up from bed and I got dressed. As he led me to God knows where, I believe my neighbors could have heard the fracas when he shut the door, and they may have called the police to my rescue. That is when he opened the gate, I was blinded by lights from outside. It was the police and the soldiers were already outside. So he quickly, out of panic, closed the gate and he pulled me back inside the yard. So the whole time, that's when he placed the gun on the side of my head. I could feel that cold steel weapon pinned on the side of my head painfully, and he pulled the trigger. When he pulled the trigger, I didn't know what was happening because I was in confusion. The gun had jammed. So this is actually when I felt the gods were on my side. He immediately tried to cock back the gun into appropriation, and that is when I tried to flee. I had not fled any further when I felt a hot substance pierce through my back, and I fell to the ground face down, and he came over me and shot over my still body a couple of times until he was certain that the deed was done. And I felt a loud bang, and he fell right next to my side, and he had committed suicide.
Oh, Malebogo.
Yes.
What a experience. I'm so moved by listening to it, and I appreciate how tremendously difficult it must be for you to tell that story, which is something that happened to you in your past in 2009, and amazingly, incredibly, you did survive.
Yeah.
And you have gone on to thrive despite that atrocious incident and very, very, very traumatic experience.
Yes. I was actually shot a total of 8 bullets. It was a very traumatic experience for me and for my family. I woke up the next day in a moment of in feeling. It was a moment of, I don't know how to describe it. It was a moment of bewilderment. My family was there, and my mom, and they were all shattered. So it was really, really difficult. Yeah.
So you were unconscious at that point.
Yes.
The police came, and obviously an ambulance, and they took you to hospital.
Yes.
And then the next day you came round.
Yes.
Amazingly.
Yes. But of course, the doctors told my parents that I may not be able to survive the incident because of the amount of because of the extent of the injury. So my parents were told that I may contract pneumonia, develop pressure sores, contract infections and eventually die. So this is when they decided that no, I needed to be taken to South Africa for a second opinion in medical intervention, because this was like a new thing to Botswana, but then in South Africa they have experiences of gunshots and so forth.
Right.
So that's the reason why I was immediately transferred to South Africa.
Right.
Yes.
And that turned out to be a really good decision, because you were in hospital
Absolutely,
there
yes,
for
and I
quite
was
a long
hospitalized for quite a while, because I needed to, because with the extent of the damage that was done to my body, I had broken ribs, had suffered internal bleeding. I was a complete wreck without full knowledge of what light I had. So I was hospitalized for almost 6 months, and I needed to do so much within that space in my road to recovery and to recuperation.
It must have been such an incredibly challenging and difficult time. I can't even imagine what was required of you. You were being required to try to fully commit to this program of physiotherapy, I presume, and medication, and it must have been so unbelievably hard. And I imagine every day in that period you would be waking up and again and realizing what's happened to you, and having to come to terms with it.
Yes.
What was it like during that period? I presume it's a kind of take every day, like you can only live in the moment.
Yes.
Or am I wrong? Were you constantly projecting into the future and trying to imagine what your life would be like? Or what was it like? What was going through your mind?
Firstly, surviving the attack was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Firstly, there was the trauma part. I had to fight for bare survival. I also had to go through the emotions. I had to question myself. What did I do wrong? Why did he have to be so inhuman? Why would something like this happen to me? Was I really such a bad person that God would allow me to suffer so much? And certainly there was the emotional and psychological part. How was I going to deal with all these emotions that were inside of me, the self-doubts, I just had so much to deal with, just the emotions, and having to understand the injury itself, and how I was going to go about it, and how was I going to be able to heal. And lastly, there was the disability itself. I mean, being so vibrant, being having a background of as I was an athlete, and I was playing for the national team at the time, and having to go through all of that and to process it. And I asked myself, how was I going to look at my peers and tell them that I was not able to walk, or that my life had changed to such extremities? And with all of those questions, I needed to really sit and process everything and have a clearer understanding of what my life was going to be, because I was new in the injury, and I really needed support. I needed to go, and I had to have someone constantly reassure me that it was going to be okay. And the reason why I say my moment of tenderness was when I realized that I had to fight, not only for myself, but most importantly for my mom, and the love that she was able to give me, and the space that she created, that every moment when she was with me took all the pain, all the self-doubt and everything away. It made me feel calm. It made me feel needed. It made me feel like there was someone that I needed to fight for other than myself. And who else was going to give her any meaning of she didn't have any other child. She didn't have it any other way. And I was her only hope, and she was my rock, and I needed to fight for her.
Oh, that's just so incredible. The way you describe the way you felt at the time, it's just so moving. And what I think is amazing is how, it just enforces the fact that relationships are so central to our lives, and they're how we show up in the world, and it's in relation to others, the support, the love, the purpose that we experience through being in those relationships is what helps us to go through our life and hopefully in the best way that we can. And it feels like one of the things that's incredible about you, and I really mean this, I think you're an absolutely incredible person, one of the most inspiring people I've ever had the privilege to meet. I think one of the things that's really incredible about you is the way that you were able to find that inner strength. Because that's really what has enabled you to thrive and go on with the rest of your life. How could you talk a bit about how that process unfolded? I know that you were seeing a therapist who really helped you. Is there any way that you can explain how it kind of worked for you, or what the process involved? I'm presuming that there must have been some sense of letting go of the anger or the resentment, and also a feeling of hope, a very strong sense of hope in terms of what your life was going to be going into the future. Could you talk about that for us?
Yes, obviously when I was in hospital, I had a lot going on in my mind, and one of the things that I was earlier on in my road or intervention to recuperation was that I was very, very angry. I was very angry and questioned so much about myself. Like I was saying earlier, was I such a bad person that I needed to have, experienced such a brutal attack? Was I such a bad person to him that he needed to punish me in this way? And I also questioned God, why God wouldn't protect me. Why is I such a bad person that God needed to punish me in this way? And of course I cried and I battled within myself, and at some point I just didn't want to talk to anyone except my mom, who gave me such whenever I talked to her, and she everything just came together. There was this feeling that is unexplainable that really washed over me, that would give me a possible outlook to even speaking to a therapist. So little by little, I appreciated that someone other than my mother wanted to make things right, wanted to give me a clearer understanding of what really needed to come out, so that I can have peace, so that I can forgive, so that I can start the journey of healing. So that when that moment of realization came, it was like a rude awakening. So I went through with the psychological therapist, who also was able to go with me on this journey and help me heal. And one of the most important things in life that I came to realize is that forgiving myself and forgiving that individual who had caused this misery was one of the biggest steps into healing. And it was able to helped me understand so many things about myself, and having to appreciate my disability, appreciate myself for the person that I was. And with the support and love of my family, I was then able to say, I am exactly where I needed to be, that I needed to do something so that I could also, I needed to go through the emotions so that I can understand what other people are going through. And this is when I started the journey to accept that I can also reach out to other girls who are in maybe similar situations, and motivate them to come out of these difficult situations. This is when I started my journey to talk about my experiences with the hope that it will touch the lives of many. And I told myself that if one woman would listen and look at and take from and draw from my experiences and maybe change their circumstances and save them from potential danger.
Oh, that's incredible. So you really you managed to locate this sense of purpose within you, and that's what really propelled you forward and enabled you to start to recover.
Yes, absolutely.
And gave you the inspiration and the hope.
Yes.
In terms of what your future could look like.
Yes. And one amazing thing that really came out was the fact that when you start talking to people, you think that you are actually helping them. But little did I know that I was actually helping myself heal. Wow. And with that, the pain was moving away from me, and I was releasing it to other people that I was healing.
Wow.
And there's just some phenomenal thing going on about it that is very hard to understand. But it's just that moment where you talk to people and you think that you are helping them with their pain, that you are actually helping yourself to deal with the emotions yourself.
Gosh, that's really, really fascinating. And
yes.
So going into this journey of mentoring and inspiring and helping other women, you that purpose and that hope, it was there, but it kind of, the healing journey was continuing throughout.
Yes.
That's really, really interesting.
Yes.
Can I just talk a bit about forgiveness with you? Because I would imagine that lots of people listening to this would be surprised or amazed to think that you could forgive someone for such an atrocious and terrible act. How do you do that? How do you let go of those feelings of deep resentment and pain?
It is not easy to forgive and forget. Obviously, you can forgive, but you can never forget such an experience of this nature, of this magnitude. When I was in hospital, it wasn't easy for me to even think about the details of that horrible experience. But once I talked to my therapist, and once I talked to friends, I had conversations with a lot of people. And again, when you're in hospital, your situation is different because you are around people who have similar experience or even worse. So it is not as comfortable as when you are outside hospital. Mm-hmm. So when I was there, it was more easier for me to relate with other individuals who had maybe gunshots, injuries, who couldn't walk, who couldn't talk, who couldn't hold. And once you go out of that space, then that is when the challenge comes. So when I was back in Botswana, it was then that my actual journey of healing started, because now I was faced with people now were able to see that I was in a wheelchair, that I needed to go out of my home and into spaces, which wasn't easy as well. So this is why I needed to have constant support, constant therapy with my counselor, because immediately when I got here, I had a personal psychological therapists who would come to my house and have conversations with me. And from those conversations, she was able to plant a seed of growth, a seed of realization, and a seed of forgiveness, to take me through the emotions that I needed to forgive myself, so that I can be able to forgive everything and forgive that individual who had perpetuated this act. And one of the things that I really was able to note was that I then became free in my heart. I was able to say, yes, I forgive him. He was wrong. He caused so much pain, but he's no more. I needed to move with my life because I could not let my emotions die with him. And because I still had life inside of me, I needed to do something positive. And I had to have a positive mindset, a positive outreach to life. And this really helped me grow, and it helped me be able to reach out to other people. And it is not an easy journey, but once you have that feeling that you are free, then comes with a whole lot of positivity and a whole lot of energy that really makes you feel like a complete individual. And of course, with the support, the tremendous support of my family and my friends, it really made the journey worthwhile.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's so incredible. So you're describing how when you start to feel that weight, the weight of the resentment and this inability to forgive, when you start to feel that lift, it feels so incredible. It feels so good that that inspires you to want to keep working on that.
And it really inspires you to feel human again, because given the fact that disability on itself is a challenge, and when you are a newly injured individual, it becomes very difficult for you to navigate your life like it was before. So I needed to learn how to propel the wheelchair first of all, and how to be in spaces with people and feel comfortable like I am today. So those are just steps in life that really needs to happen to you so that you can be wholesome. So
there was all those practical things that you were going to have to get to grips with, on top of all the emotional.
So I was just I really appreciate that with the help of the psychological therapists, with support of my family, I became a new it's like a new lease to life, where you feel like you can even fit just the way you are. Life doesn't have to be perfect. No one is perfect. And I realized that even working people have got problems. So who was I not to have to feel this way? So I needed really to be to understand it in that kind of way, for it to feel logical to me and to feel logical to other people, and for me to be able to inspire and motivate people through my experiences, so they know that there's always light at the end of the tunnel, that life doesn't just go because something of that nature has happened to you.
Absolutely. Oh, incredible. In terms of the forgiveness, was it something like you had empathy perhaps with your ex-partner's pain? He must have had pain, and he obviously wasn't in his right mind to do what he did. Was it through trying to understand him that you were able to forgive him, or was it something else? What was the...
I just don't believe that any of my healing had anything to do with him specifically, because when I was at that stage in my life, I was really, really hurting. And I think the only thing that I did was selfishly to think about myself and to think about my mother. I didn't really think about him that much. The only time that I thought of him was when I would have questions as to why he would do that. And I hardly ever dwelled on thinking about what his thoughts were.
Okay.
Of course, there were moments where I think, what was he thinking?
Yeah.
Why would he do this?
Yeah.
But not necessarily that I would dwell on to pity him.
Yes.
I never really pitied him. I just pitied myself. And I think because I was overburdened by pain, I had this tremendous pain that is just unexplainable. I didn't think that someone would function when the body was overwhelmed by such pain. So most of my thinking was taken by the amount of pain that I felt in my body, that I needed to do exercises and I needed to do so much, but my pain was, my body was really sore. So I think most of my thoughts were taken by the fact that I was in so much pain that I needed to deal with, and mostly in medication. And I was just, the only time that I was really, really happy and that took away everything was when my mom was with me. So it's the only moment when I felt I was just me.
Comforted.
I was very, very comfortable.
Safe.
In her. Yes, I was very, very safe. So once she had to go back to Botswana, when I was in hospital, I would really feel at my lowest.
Oh.
Yes, but when she was around me, so that is when immediately when I was out of hospital, I was then free to be with her. And I was just under the tender love of my mom, and everything was just sane.
Oh. So it sounds like what you're talking about is acceptance. What actually happened was, it wasn't so much of a process of understanding why your ex-partner did what he did. It was more of an acceptance of, this happened, and now I'm here, and I've got this, my life has changed direction.
Yes.
So now what do I do? Where do I go from here? And from what you've said, what really astounds me is this real curiosity that you have for life, and this real kind of optimism. Has that always been there? Is that who you've always been?
I want to believe to some extent I've always been a very positive individual. Maybe it came handy to my healing because I wasn't really drawn into the negativity of the whys and why not, you know. So I was mostly looking forward to my healing, and I listened to my doctors and I'd heard to the advice that they gave me, and I did my bit in my journey of healing. I needed to do something, and I did exactly what I was expected, despite the difficulties. Because I went back to being a child again. I learned how to touch, how to hold a glass. And I really appreciated my progress as I went along, because now I was able to sit on a wheelchair and gradually move with so many things that were foreign to me. So I just like a child, I needed to learn how to do things again.
Gosh, that's incredible. I hadn't realised that you weren't able to use your
I wasn't
your
able
hands.
to do anything. I wasn't able to use my hands. I wasn't able to sit like I am sitting now. So this was like a gradual progress that when once you know how to do something new, you learn new tricks, then you become very happy about it. So all of this, led to a path where I felt, wow, I'm really doing better. And it gave me a sense of hope and a realization that things can actually work no matter the difficulties.
Yeah, so you were really living in the present moment.
Yes.
And acknowledging your progress and then kind of celebrating it sort of day by
every
day
step.
with hope.
Yes.
That's truly incredible.
Yes.
I really want to hear some more about your work with women, the inspirational talks, the mentoring that you do. So it seems as though there's two parts to it. There's the domestic violence part, and then there's the kind of raising awareness of women with disabilities part.
Yes.
In terms of the domestic violence, I mean, I've just been looking into domestic violence in Botswana and sort of also in the wider context in the world, and I can't actually quite believe. I mean, I knew that it was not a good situation, but the extent of women suffering domestic violence still today, I think probably a lot of us would think that it wasn't really a problem, and maybe it has been in the past, but it is. And I think according to a UN report, is it 1 in 3 women in Botswana experience some sort of domestic violence or similar in their lifetime. What do you think is going on? Like, what's driving this? Why is it that in 2021 this is the situation that so many women face?
First, let me just reflect on my understanding of violence then, when I was still vibrant and outgoing. There was a lot of violence going on, but just like anyone else, I was oblivious. I didn't really go into, or maybe I wasn't really interested in these issues. But after my experience, it opened my eyes to the realization that there's a lot of violence going on. Every day when I was sitting at home listening to the news and radio, then it started to dawn on me that, wow, so many girls are losing their lives the same way as me, or even worse. And I realized that there was a lot of violence in Botswana, and I started to take note. And this really compelled me to do something to reach out to women, to motivate and inspire them with my story, such that I could save them from potential harm. And, through my work, I realized that I thought that, going out into these spaces, people would quickly pick out that, the red flags and so forth, and try and change their lives. But that is not the case. Of course, there are people who may be inspired to change, but not many people are willing to take the messages and do the needful. But what really has caused so much violence is the fact that there's a lot of things that really influenced us. One of it being technology, that now people are moving to the world of technology, and they're in spaces that really, especially women and young girls, that really create vulnerability for their issues. And also there are so many things like the lack of economic, that Botswana is now classified as a middle earning country.
Yes.
But the problems and issues that women face in the country have not really changed. There's still lack of employment, especially in rural areas where I come from, where women are reliant on their partners. So this means that it places them in a spot where they're not able to fend for their families and their children and so forth. And there are a lot of girls that are dropouts, and there's no significant interventions for where they will go after this.
Right.
So there are no opportunities. The lack of opportunities places them in this in these situations where they are dependent on their partners, which exacerbates the level of violence. Because once you're dependent on someone, which means that they can do anything because they are the provider. So these are the reasons why there are so many cases of abuse. And now with the advent of COVID-19, we had seen so many cases, because now people are being laid out of work. The breadwinners are laid out of work, and now they are confined in similar spaces with women and children. That is also exacerbating the amount of violence that we see now. Young children are being sexually exploited, and as well as persons with disabilities, because they're confined in similar spaces, and there are no outlets for people to express themselves. There are no outlets, especially now that there are many restrictions also to alcohol. Now men are in the homes, uncles are in the homes, and this is really creating a situation where women are not able to express themselves. They're being silenced, and children are also being sexually exploited. So this is that so many things that are really adding to this increase of violence, and unfortunately the laws also are not protecting women enough. And one other thing working in this space that I was able to notice is that women are not able to navigate the legal systems available that can allow perpetrators to be held accountable. So this is why we have multiple occurrences of violence that is perpetuated to similar people. Yes.
You were explaining before on this issue in a previous conversation about how it's very difficult for women to get help because there may be a conversation with the police, but then are the police trained to understand the kind of difficulties that they're coming to them with? And then, there's, other things like support counsellors and trauma support, but it's not joined up, it's not connected.
It is not connected. And like we often advocate for one-stop shops. These are like places where you find one counsellor. There's the police in the same building. There's because in other developed countries they have one-stop shops where women can come and report and have services under the same roof. So this system in Botswana where you report here and you are sent to another place for counseling and you are sent to another place for testing and so forth really discourages women to report cases. And on the issue of women with disabilities, is actually between 3 and 8 times worse because of certain barriers where a woman with disability is not able, say maybe a woman with intellectual disability or with hearing impairments cannot be able to communicate with an officer at the police station when they're trying. There's also an issue of that women with disabilities do not have privacy, because when you go to report, obviously when you have hearing impairments or when you are blind, you cannot sign or write your own statement. So you always need to have someone there with you, and sometimes you're not able to express yourself effectively and efficiently when there's someone there with you. And sometimes because they always have to be with someone who may also be a perpetrator, and there's no how that they can be allowed to report a case of violence. So there are so many problems that we wish the government can address, or we wish that the government can come and change certain policies and laws that can protect the lives of women and children.
Absolutely. It sounds like there's so much work to be done.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but of course we know that there is something in place, but it is not enough. And as long as the policies and laws are not strengthened, then we are always going to have these escalating numbers of violence in Botswana, because then there are no outlets for women to express themselves, there are no opportunities, and this really exacerbates and increases the level of violence that we see in the country.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Really interesting hearing about how the system works currently in Botswana, and how that really isn't serving
Yes.
women who are experiencing domestic violence, and children as well,
Yes.
especially women who have disabilities.
Mm.
So systemically there's a lot that needs to be done.
Yes.
But I'm also really interested in what's driving this, and I'm wondering what you think about how boys are being brought up. I mean, not even just in Botswana, but globally. What are the values and the belief systems that they are, being taught, that they're absorbing as they grow into men?
Yeah.
And, how are they being taught to relate to women and perceive women? What do you think is going on, and what needs to change?
Yes, I mean, one of the key areas is culture plays a huge role into how men turn out to be, how boys turn out to be when they get older. Firstly, in our culture, men are told from a very young age that they are the head of the house. And also how they are going to grow up thinking that they are superior to women usually places or plants a seed of superiority against women, and they always feel like they're macho enough to instill, because they think that they're providers, they can do whatever they can do to...
They can control
Yes, they can
women,
control and so forth. And again, the issue of... Within the issue of culture as well, there are elements within culture that places women in the back burner, because in Botswana men pay dowry for women, and that also makes men think that they're superior, and the patriarchal system here in Botswana that women experience is that men will always feel superior because they pay dowry for women, and in that way they think that they own women, and they don't allow women as a place to express themselves. Yes.
Yeah, that system of dowry is interesting.
Yes.
So like you said, it encourages this belief of ownership and control,
and superiority. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And again, getting back also to your question about what needs to be done about young boys, is that young boys need from a very young age to be educated about the implications of violating women and what it can do to them. And just not a few days ago, I was I actually had a very sad story about a young girl who was stabbed by the boyfriend, and ultimately the boyfriend committed suicide. And all of this was happening all of this happened with the child there.
Oh, the child was present and watching.
The boy child there with them. So actually what happened was the man wanted to kill the child, both the mom and the child, and then commit suicide. Such environments where violence happens within the home and the boys are there to actually experience it is really increases their belief that it's okay to violate a woman from a young age. So parents need to understand that it creates creating this hostile environment where there's a lot of abuse in the home actually motivates young boys to grow understanding that they need to perpetrate the abuse themselves, because that's the only thing they know. When they see their fathers beating their mom, it's the only thing that they know that they need to do to a woman. So a lot of education really needs to go to everyone, to the parents on how they raise the boy child, to be able to understand that it is not okay to perpetrate abuse or to live in a hostile environment like the one that they're creating for the children. Yes.
That's so interesting. So you're talking about patterns and cycles that are repeated and how important it is. And And also I think it's really important, like you said, to focus on women. Actually, a lot of development organisations really believe that, you know, they need to focus a lot of their work on women because women have the biggest influence on children.
Yes.
And if you think about, in the case of female genital mutilation, it is actually the women who are perpetrating this form of violence on each other. So I suppose, therefore, we need to start with the women. We need to start educating the way that women feel about other women.
Yes.
Do you think that women need to think differently about themselves?
Yes, absolutely.
And about other women?
There has to be. We need to cultivate the energy of sisterhood, where women look at each other as mothers and sisters and aunts as one, and that they need to cultivate that spirit of solidarity, that as sisters we need to come together, work together, and know that if we don't have that bond, then everything is going to work against us. Yes, no one is going to come to our rescue if we don't support each other and hold each other together, as well as hold each other accountable. If, like in the instance where there's this mutilation, of course it doesn't happen in Botswana, but as individuals, we know that it does happen in some parts of Africa. It's really, really sad to watch women do that to each other. When, like I often say that as women, we often talk about women empowerment, about equality and so forth. But if we don't come together and work together to see these issues through, then all our efforts are going to be negated. Yes, it is entirely up to us to show men that when we stick together, that when we build good relationships, that something can come out of it. And this is when men can also respect us. If we don't respect ourselves as women and think that men are going to be any different, then we're just lying to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I feel as though you especially draw a lot of energy from other women, from your relationship with your mum, and also from female friends, which play a big role in your life. And you have previously said to me something that really astounded me, and I've thought about it a lot ever since, about how when it comes to the accident, you felt, knowing your mother and knowing other women in your family and your friends, that maybe this accident was supposed to happen to you and not them.
Yes. There's a tremendous amount of appreciation or love for people around me. I know that the love that my mom instilled inside of me is so enormous that I'm able to think for other people. And sometimes, most times, I look at the people around me and think they're not strong enough. I want to believe that my mom, my aunties, my friends, when I look at everyone, be it strangers, I often think to myself that I am able to carry all of this. And I don't know how I did it, but I think that I don't think there's any other person who can hold it together like I did. I believe that God chose me to carry all of this burden, to carry 8 bullets, and to be at the brink of death. But I don't want any other person to go through this except myself. I'm the only one who could actually have had the courage to heal the way that I've healed. And looking at, I don't think any of my friends would withstand this. They would die instantly. They will die.
Wow.
I'm exactly where I need to be, Yes, God placed me here for a purpose, and I think that I've fulfilled it the best way that I possibly can. I'm able to share it with so many people that that obviously touches them in a different way, and I'm happy that I'm able to change people's lives. It cannot be entirely, but if two or one person's lives is inspired by my story, then I know that I'm here for a purpose, for a greater purpose than I actually that I never believed was possible. Yes.
You have so much faith in life, I think,
Yeah.
bringing you to be where you are, where you need to be, which I think that's what faith is. It's having
Yes.
this deep sense of trust.
Yes.
But you spoke earlier about God, and I wondered how that changed, because you did initially think, how could
Yeah.
God have allowed
Yes.
this to happen to me?
Yeah.
Did your relationship with God change, or your sense of understanding things from that perspective change? Because let me just tell you about a conversation I had with my son that has made me think of you. A very minor accident that he had.
Yeah.
He broke his tooth, his front
Yeah.
tooth, and it was the third time it had happened, and he was really annoyed that he was going to have to go and get it repaired again.
Yes.
And he said, if God really loved me, he wouldn't let this happen to me. Like, he
Yeah.
must be really angry with me
Yeah.
to have let this thing happen to me
Yes.
again. And I said to him, maybe God is the part of you
Yeah.
that enables you to be accepting of what's happened,
Yeah.
and to believe that everything's going to be okay.
Yes.
Is that how you feel?
I'm
your
not, I'm not
experience?
too sure about, because surprisingly, I'm not like a hardcore Christian. Yes, I even before this incident, I wasn't so much into church and Christianity and so forth. I was just an athlete. Of course, I prayed once in a while, but when this happened, it actually kind of was challenged my faith. And I asked myself so many questions, of course, about God, about maybe that I was a bad person, that is why this has happened to me. But eventually, when I had gone through the journey, within my journey of healing, I then realized that indeed I was a child of God, whichever way that came. But to this date, I still am not such a hardcore Christian. I think I just something that just healed itself, and I don't question God anymore. I think that it's just part of life. If it is because everything is done by God, then be it. But I do pray, but I'm not really too much into Christianity. Of course, people keep saying that it is because of God that you are here and that you're able to be healed. And I agree with all of it. But I'm not so much into Christianity that I process it every day and, kneel down and pray and thank God. What. But I do pray. I have my moments, but I don't know. Maybe it's just something that lives inside of you. Maybe there's a God, like people often say that that's God everywhere.
Yeah.
And in everything that we do. That is just what I believe. That you have to be human. Every single moment you have to exercise kindness and respect, because God lingers somewhere in our spaces, in our hearts. That is why we need to be gentle and be kind. So that people who go to church every Sunday, I don't want to be judgmental, but I think that there are people who really think that just going to church is enough, that they're Christian enough, that they understand God. But that isn't the case. I think our individuality of the things that we feel inside of us that propels us to act in a certain way are guided by God. So that very moment when you do something bad, or when you insult people, or when you get jealous, or when you do something really negative, really that's when you must question yourself if you are in the right of in the path of righteousness.
That's a disconnection
Yes,
there. Yeah.
that's when there's a disconnection. So I don't really believe in, praying, being, feeling like I'm a real Christian when in essence I don't relay that energy to people. So there's so many people that I admire that are not in church, but they really do good onto others.
Through their
Yes,
actions,
through
and
their
their beliefs,
actions and
their
their
words.
beliefs, yes.
Absolutely.
So sometimes I don't really understand Christianity, but I feel like God is always there and is always guiding us to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I feel that too.
Yes. There are really hateful people out there, but they go to church every day. So it doesn't mean that when you are in that space or when you are in church that you are too righteous. I think it just has to do with the individuality of how you feel and what you portray.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
And as a disabled woman, I wondered if there was anything you wanted to say about your experience or what you wanted to say to people about the way they perceive you.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you ever feel that people are afraid of making eye contact with you, or if people are afraid of even speaking to you if you're at a party because they see your wheelchair and they feel intimidated by it.
Yeah.
But I know that you love having a good time at a
Yes,
party.
I do.
You're there, in the middle of it, dancing, having a glass of wine. Being in a wheelchair hasn't stopped you from enjoying yourself, basically.
Absolutely.
What would you like to say to people about how they respond to when they see the wheelchair, how they respond to disabled people?
Yeah. One really heartwarming thing about Botswana is that people are warming towards towards disability. So, in many years ago, people didn't really understand much about disability. But as things transform, as we go into I don't know how to describe it. Now the world is changing and people are starting to warm up and acknowledge disabled persons. And of course, with the education that is being placed out there about the activism, about disability, now Botswana are warming towards the issue of disability. So, but with me, when I walk around town, I know people are curious when they see you, because in the beginning, disability was associated with maybe, I don't know if I would be using the right word if I said, they think that you're not intellectually there. Yes, usually when you're disabled, people think that you're not in the right frame of mind to understand things. Maybe they want you to look dirty and not be smart. When you're looking smart, you look different. So in my view or in my experience, I'd say that people are usually curious. So sometimes they come to me and they'll ask me things like, why are you smart but you are in a wheelchair? Things like that. Yes, people are always curious to ask me so many, sometimes demeaning, sometimes I laugh about it. And it doesn't really do anything to me because I know who I am, and disability doesn't really bother me that much, except when I'm in spaces when I don't have access. That is when there's a problem that I'll just question myself. I would have this feeling of uncertainty about certain things, like I don't belong in that space when there's no access. It usually happens to me when I get to a place where I need to be lifted. That I really don't like it.
No.
Yeah, it makes me really feel like I'm a cripple.
I'm very vulnerable.
Yeah, it makes me vulnerable. Yeah, yes, that's the right word, vulnerable.
Yeah.
So other than that, when I'm in spaces where I have access, I fully enjoy myself like an abled person. Yeah, so I want people with disability to really appreciate what they have and do what they can whenever they have the moment to do it. Because we're not always in spaces where we feel 100% ourselves. We are usually very vulnerable. Yes.
And that's why it's so important to see people with disabilities, to see them out in the world, taking part in the world.
They need to take part. They need to, of course, there's so many disadvantages for them. But if you are in a space where there's an advantage for you to be yourself, then take it and use it to your advantage, because we don't always have too many advantages. Yes, be it in schools, this a lot of problems usually are caused by a lack of access for persons with disabilities, and they're not able to express themselves, because when you go, like I was saying, when I go to, even myself, when I go to malls where there's no access, I really feel out of place. And it can instantly change my mood, because sometimes you come and you're happy and looking forward to an event, but when you get there, you're supposed to be carried over some stairs, so it really takes you out of the mood instantly. Yes.
And do you find there's an assumption by people that you'll be okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And people just don't understand how vulnerable we feel and how disappointed we feel when something of that nature happens. Yes, because I've actually had my fair share. Like, I was presenting somewhere that just the other day, I came in high moods. I was well prepared, but the moment I got to that place, there was no access for me. The meeting, dear. The conference was actually in the second floor,
right?
And I was on ground floor. And I had to be literally lifted. I immediately wanted to stop and go back home. I felt like I needed to just go back. Yeah, I was turned off.
I'm not surprised, because you would have had to have in your mind prepared yourself for being very uncomfortable and being completely out of your comfort zone. And, like you said, feeling very vulnerable.
Because sometimes, with me, I don't know if it happens to other disabled people. Sometimes I literally forget that I'm disabled. Yeah, because when everything is smooth, you feel like you're just normal.
Yeah, that's how it should be.
Yes, like when I was going through here, I just came and everything was flowing. And I never even had a moment of hesitation. So I'm just looking towards the interview and I'm here. But then imagine if it was you and you have to cross, you are obviously on your 2 feet and you can walk and do everything. But if you're faced with if you're going for an interview and you're faced with a challenge or a hindrance of having to walk through water or having to cross a river barefoot, it will obviously take you off the mood, because this is not something that you are expecting. So these hindrances of access especially are really a problem for persons with disabilities.
Of course, because how then can you focus fully on what you've come to do?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed this conversation, Malebogo. It's been absolutely tremendous, and I will never forget speaking to you. I really would like to end the conversation with a question that I ask all the interviewees on the Tenderness Revolution, and it's about the fact that this quality of tenderness that we have for ourselves and others, because they enable us to fully see the way things are these 3 qualities that we experience as humans, and they are courage, curiosity, and compassion. And I wanted to ask you, if you had to choose one of these qualities that means the most to you in your life, which one would you choose?
I will definitely, with a doubt, choose courage. Courage is very important, because with it then comes all of this compassion, because you have the courage to think not only for yourself, you have the courage to accept that something has happened for you to function. So courage is a very, very important aspect of one's life that I think that women not only myself, because usually I speak for women, children, and persons with disabilities, I say that you have the courage to do or to stand for yourself, or that you have the courage to use your voice to change the world, and that our voices and our words are important, and our lives are also important. So that is why you need to have the courage to do that. It will take you to do so many things that also brings about love and compassion.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And it's like everything you've spoken about in this interview, you know, you have that courage, and it's connected to that sense of faith and purpose, and you have to just have the courage to surrender to that, and then bring that forth out into the world, and then
absolutely,
you'll be who you're meant to be.
Courage is such a mentorship itself on its own, that it really transcends you to greater heights, because you can never do anything without feeling the courage to do it. So it really is a motivational factor inside of us, or it really transcends us into amazing individuals.
Absolutely.
The courage to do what we can do and to accept the difference.
Absolutely. And I think you, more than anyone that I've ever met, is a woman of courage. In fact, you were chosen as a woman of courage.
I'm actually the International Woman of Courage. So that speaks to us, courage being one of the things that really is instrumental in one's growth.
That's right. You were chosen, was it in 2017?
2017, yes. I was awarded the International Woman of Courage in Washington, D.C. by the then former First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Melania Trump.
That's amazing, and so well deserved, Malebogo.
Thank you
so much for being on the Tenderness Revolution. I will never forget speaking to you.
Yes, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Tenderness Revolution. I hope you come back for more, because my aim with this podcast is to help us become more aware of these moments of kindness and compassion and how they shape our lives, and enable us to feel more connected to the world around us.